My name is AJ Parr. I am from Venezuela. I live in Colombia. And I had a very interesting experience in 1991. I woke up in the middle of the night and it was completely dark. It was so dark that I raised my hands and tried to see the palm of my hands, but I couldn't. So this was really strange because normally when you wake up in the middle of the night, you can more or less take a look at your room and recognize it. But this, I immediately felt that I was somewhere else. So I looked around and then I thought, look, this is so dark that there could be something or someone hidden in the darkness and I would never know. So I got really scared, and all of a sudden I woke up in my bed. I took a deep breath, and I, I didn't know what was going on. So this happened again the following night. It actually happened 3 nights in a row. I don't know why. I don't know if I stopped breathing. I do know that every time that I woke up, I took a deep breath, and it felt like I had stopped breathing. So the second night that this happened, once again I woke up in this completely dark space. I raised my hands, I looked at them, and I couldn't see anything. But this time, immediately I thought that there could be something or someone hidden in the darkness, and I sort of felt that presence. And it was really scary. And the third night, when this happened, like I said, I don't know why it happened. I felt this presence, and I was right. There was someone there. At least I heard a voice that said, "Surrender, all is one." I was perplexed because I did not understand how there could be someone speaking to me, but I had no other option but to relax. It was like an order. I immediately relaxed, and the sensation of fear, when you're afraid, you feel like an emptiness in your chest. It's more or less the same feeling that you get when you jump from a high distance, or when you're in a car and you go over uh, a lump. You feel your chest expanding. So when I relaxed, I noticed that my chest continued to expand. It was more or less as if I was getting more afraid, but I was not. But as I thought about it, this continued to grow and grow, and it expanded. My chest seemed to be bigger than my body, than my house, than everything, and all of a sudden it exploded. And I appeared in what I call the middle of a star. I could look in all directions at the same time. I could look up, down, to the right, to the left, in all directions at the same time. And in the middle, there was the source of this light, but it was also my chest. But I had no body. I could not see myself within that experience. I know that I could see in all directions at the same time, and all I could see was light. In the center, the light was emanating in all directions, and I could see at the same time each ray of light extending infinitely. I could also see what I felt that in that moment. I could feel that this light was occupying a space, and around each ray of light, I could see an empty space, and then the nearest ray of light. So I felt at the same time that I was full and that I was empty. I felt this vast emptiness, and I also felt that it was filled with light. I followed this each ray to the end, and I could not reach the end. Every time uh, wherever I placed my focus, I would be there. So if I focused my attention on the center of the star, I would see it. I would also continue seeing everything at once. But every time I tried to see the end of where these rays extended, I would find myself with that it was infinitely longer, and it was impossible to determine the exact space that it covered. At the same time, I was hearing, it wasn't a thunder, it was like wind, but it was really strong, the sound. I was not really thinking, I was feeling. So I don't remember thinking about anything. I was just aware of where I was. I also don't know how long I stayed in that realm, if you can call it, if you can give it a name. But it seemed to me that I stayed there forever. And all of a sudden, I appeared in my bed, took a deep breath, and grabbed my head, and I said, "Wow!" I could still feel that I was there. I could still feel that instead of being this body, I was like a sphere. Because that's the sensation that I had when I was the star. I my 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 awareness was hemispheric, like a hemisphere. So when I woke up, I grabbed my head and I could still feel that I was like a sphere instead of this body, or as well as this body. So I got up without being able to understand what had happened, and I could feel that I was myself, that I was everything. That's another thing that I felt when I was in the light. I felt that I was everything, that I was all, that there was only one being, and it was me. I was part of that single being. So when I got up, I could still feel that I was everything. So I looked at the wall, the nearest wall, and I could feel that I was the wall, but I placed my hand on top of the wall, and I could feel, actually, I could sense my hand against the wall, but I could also feel that I was the wall pressing back. So I pressed harder, and I felt that the wall was pressing harder against me. So I had like this double consciousness. This double awareness of being myself and being the other. So this was really unexplainable, undescribable. I could not understand. All I knew was that it was like a mystical experience. And I sensed that this was a very holy experience. And I realized that this was the secret teaching behind all religions. I had been searching for the meaning of religions since I was a kid. I had when I was 6 years old, I used to dream a lot with angels, and until I turned 7, these angels told me that when I turned 7, I would stop seeing them, and it happened. And after that, when I turned 7, I started having nightmares, and there was one recurring nightmare that always repeated itself. I was on the top of a skyscraper that was under construction. It was the steel structure of the building, and I was on top. And I would look down and I would freeze, I would really be scared. And this is something that happened many nights. One night, I was around 8 years old. I said, "Wow, this looks exactly like the nightmare I've been having." So I realized within the dream or within the nightmare, I realized that I was actually having a nightmare. So I, when I realized this, I said, "Wow!" But then, if this is a dream, nothing will happen if I jump. And I jumped, and I could alter the dream. As I fell down, I tried to stop the fall, but I couldn't. So I imagined, I was 8 years old, so I said, okay, I want to be sitting in a sofa reading a comic book. And that's what appeared. So all of a sudden, a sofa appeared. I was reading a comic book, but I could not stop it from falling. So I said, okay, when it hits the bottom, I want the sofa to bounce. And that's what happened. And I had this ability since then to wake up within the nightmares and control them and change them. And this continued throughout my teenage years. I also had what they call sleep paralysis. This was really terrible. I would also I would wake up in a dream, but I would be frozen. Could not move, and I was in like a dark space similar to the one that I had been. And when I was a teenager, I started having involuntary out of body experiences. I would rise from my bed, I would walk to the kitchen, and all of a sudden, when I'm in the kitchen, I would realize that I had my eyes closed. So when I opened them, I was back in my bed. So I realized that I was leaving my body, and I really had a hard time trying to control that. I decided that I did not want that to happen. I was scared. So I eluded those type of experiences for many years. I learned to meditate when I was 16, and when I was 17 and 18, I continued meditating, and I had an experience in meditation in which I felt one with the world, or I had this what they call a oneness experience. However, it was not as strong as what happened to me that night. So back to the moment when I had this experience and I was pressing my hand against the wall. I asked God, I asked the universe, what's going on? So the following day, I could not stop thinking about it. So the following day, I asked in meditation, I asked, what happened? What happened? Please tell me. And I had this download. It was, first I felt the presence of a very old man. I did not see him, but I could feel that he was old. He was like a grandfather, but he was really old, too old to be alive. So it made me cry. I realized he was so old. I don't know why, but my tears started falling. And it was like he wanted me to know, like a small poem, or a small story, or a small explanation. And this was the explanation that I got. It was, in the beginning was the One, and the One was alone, but he wanted to play. So he divided himself into two, gave number two amnesia, and thus the game began. So all of a sudden I realized that this was the creation story. If there is a single consciousness in the universe, if God is everything and we are part of God, then how did he create the rest? So obviously, this is according to the explanation I got. God divided himself into multiple beings and made each one of them forget that they were God. So this was a super important explanation. I realized that this explanation was highly valuable, and also I understood that the mission or the object of being alive is to remember where we came from, is to remember to go back home. So it seemed like this was the purpose that God had when He created all of this. So after that, the following days, I started to find. I said, okay, if this is true, then there must be some sort of explanation in the Bible, in the Holy Scriptures. Back then, I had already, I had the Bhagavad Gita, I had read the Bible, I knew the history, New Testament. I knew that it had been written like 40 years after Jesus died, and that it had been, people had added parts to it, that it was not the original writings. But I started reading, and yes, Jesus talks about being the Father and I are one. He being one with the Father, and he also said that he was one with all of us. Basically, that we are all one. So I said, okay, and he also said the truth shall set you free. So all of a sudden, I started adding two and two together, and I realized that yes, this could be the original teaching of the Bible. And then I started reading about Hinduism, and it took me months and years to do this research. But in Hinduism, they talk about Maya, which is the world of illusion. So I realized that there was like two worlds. The real world, which is oneness, God, or everything. And then the world of illusion is this world of individuality. The world that makes us think that we are separated from God. And I realized that the basic teaching of Hinduism is recognizing this illusion and realizing the true reality. So I remembered also that Jesus talked about the prince of this world, and he talked about not having treasures in this world but in the other. So I realized that he was also talking about two worlds, the real world and the world of illusion, the world of desire. Also, Buddha talked about the road to end suffering, the path to end suffering. And this path to end suffering is recognizing the illusion of this world. And I started seeing that everything was tied in together. I also studied the Tao Te Ching, which is the basis of the Taoist or Taoist faith or path. And they also talk about the importance of recognizing that we have like an illusory world. For example, they called this God or one, they call him the Tao. And they say, the Tao Te Ching begins with this phrase: the Tao that you speak of is not the Tao, is not the eternal Tao. So I translated this to God. The God you speak of is not the eternal God. So I started realizing that words are unreal. When you talk about God, you are labeling it. but that's not really what you mean. I mean, the world of experience is the real world, but this world of concepts, of words, of mental definitions, categories, this is something that we have created as humans uh, after we developed verbal language and also verbal thinking. So when humans developed language, at first they did not think, they did not continuously think, because they were basically developing a communication means. But when we started talking to ourselves, that's when the illusory world really got huge. So I noticed that in all religions, basically in all true religions, the basic teaching uh, is evolves around this. There's another thing that I noticed. Jesus never left anything written. His teachings were a practical teaching of experience. Buddha didn't write anything. Krishna did not write anything. So, who wrote these books? They were written by the followers of these people. So I started not disdaining religions, but I started understanding that religions are simply a human institutions, that they are not the true path that was founded by these avatars or these sacred spiritual guides that set the path. I also noticed something, that in the Bible, when they talk about the followers of Jesus, more specifically when they detained Paul and they said, "Okay, you are a member of the way." They called, originally they were not known as Christians. They were called the followers of the way. And in India, the Sanatana Dharma, which was the original religion, is also known as the endless way. And Buddhism is also known as the way, and Taoism also, they were known as the way. So it seems to me like there was like a very ancient tradition known as the way, and it was the basic teaching that can be found in all religions. So I after years of doing what I call comparative study of religions, I had not met anyone who had had an experience like I had. So I asked around. I always asked, "Look, have you experienced this oneness?" And I did read, some about samadhi, about nirvana, but I didn't know anyone who had actually experienced something like that. So I had a hard time finding people to share my experience with. When I told my family, they thought it was something a dream, or something I made up, or they thought, some people even thought I was crazy. So I stopped sharing my experience with people until I met a near-death experiencer. Her name is Tessa Romero. She is from Spain, and she wanted me to help her translate a book about her near-death experience from Spanish to English. So when I met her and I read her book, I realized several things. She was also in this dark place. And when I spoke to her, she told me, "Look, that is known among near-death experiencers as the void, this totally dark place that is often experienced by people who have had an NDE. It's called the void. And she also saw the light, and she could also see in all directions at the same time. She said, look, this is what is known as 360-degree vision. And it's also something commonly found in NDEs. And the oneness experience, this experience of being one with everything, was also something that she felt and that many people who have had an NDE also experience. So I started thinking, realizing that, wow, maybe I did have, what I had was an, an NDE. But since I could not prove it, I started saying, okay, mine was an NDE-like experience, and I started calling it like that. And I said, okay, since I am a journalist, I am going to start interviewing people. I noticed that there were many YouTube channels and there were many videos, but I wanted to have that direct contact with people who had had similar experiences. And I wanted to ask them questions and see for myself if I had really had something like they had. So I started interviewing people. I created a YouTube channel and I started interviewing people. And one of the first things I noticed is that everyone's experience is completely different, yet they share common traits. One of the first books I read about this was Life After Life by Dr. Raymond Moody, and he was the first one not only to coin the term near-death experience, but he was also the first one to point out that near-death experiences are different, but they share common traits. He listed 15 common traits. I found that, and he also mentions that it's very hard to find one person with the 15 traits, but it's normally people who have had an NDE have at least one and up to several or all of these commonalities. So when I started interviewing people, I got hooked. I realized that not only I found people who had had an experience like mine, but I found experiences that were a million times more intense than mine. And I started learning from these experiences. Basically, the experience that most shocked me was the life reviews. When I started interviewing people, I interviewed two persons. One was a former policeman, and the other one was a former military. He was from the army. And both of them had really intense life reviews in which they not only relived what they experienced, but also what they made other people experience. Or if they were bad to them, they could feel exactly what they felt when they were being mean or bad to someone else, but they could also experience what that other person felt when they were being treated bad by them. So these two persons, they had really long life reviews, and both of them now in the present, they are dedicated. They left their jobs and they are focused on helping the homeless. They don't know each other. They live in different parts of the United States, but they became very Christian like in their spirit, do to others what you would like others to do to you. And they like helping people. And before that, Imagine a policeman and, and, and a military police from the army. They had done really bad things. And more recently, I interviewed someone who was in jail, in prison, for 29 years. And he also had a near death experience, and he had a very intense life review that changed him. And after that, he came back completely transformed. He could not do evil to anyone because he was forced to relive everything he had done to others and also to experience it from the point of view of the other person. So this guy came back and he doesn't even cuss anymore. He treats, he does, he doesn't dare treat other people's, bad or wrong. And this transformation is, I would say, in 1 out of 10 near death experiences, this happens. They come back totally transformed, loving, and helping others. It doesn't happen in all cases, and not everyone gets a life review, by the way. But I've also seen many uh, NDE stories here in Tales of Resilience, and I know that this is something that regularly happens.
I think just hearing about it, as someone who has never had an NDE or such an experience, but hearing about it, I think it makes one wonder, how can I act better in my own life? How can I show up as the better version of me?
Right. So I think that in prehistoric times, when we were only small groups in small tribes trying to survive, there were people who had NDEs, and these came back with this knowledge of the spiritual path. And the something that also happens with in some cases with near death experiences is that they come back with powers or gifts. Some of them can heal, some of them can talk to dead spirits, to spirits, some of them can talk to spirit guides. And I think that these were fundamental for the evolution of the first primitive societies in prehistoric times. The shamans, the witch doctors, the leaders of the tribe, I believe, were those who had had not only near death experiences, but also spiritual transformative experiences. So I think this is a mechanism, a natural mechanism that God or Mother Nature has to improve mankind.
A lot of your research has focused on NDEs in children. So I was wondering if you've noticed a difference between the NDEs that happen to children and other NDEers. And one thing that I hear sometimes is that children are closer to the other side than we are. They're a bit more connected than adults most of the time are. So I was wondering.
Well, yes, I don't know. I'd like to mention that my first research after I started my channel, I wrote this. I wrote 2 books. The first one was Stairway to Heaven. I analyzed 25 near-death experiences of encounters with God, Jesus, or paradise and tried to find the commonalities. And when I was doing this research, I noticed that some of the people that I interviewed had had their experiences when they were small children. So I started saving these cases for another book. And I focused on trying to find the commonalities in both adults and children. And when I asked around, I also interviewed Raymond Moody, Melvin Morse, I interviewed Pim van Lommel, many NDE researchers, and asked them, why are these NDEs so different? And they all said that it was due to the cultural background of the person, their education, and their religion's training. However, when I started interviewing people who had had a near-death experience when they were 2 years old, when they were 3 years old, when they were 4 years old, they basically had no cultural background. They had no religious formation. So, yet they displayed the same commonalities. So this was really interesting. So it seemed to me that although there is an influence, a cultural influence, this has more to do with, I believe, with what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. This is something that is not learned during our lifetime. This is something that we bring in our genes, to say it some way. It's like an instinct. So I believe that somehow when people die or have a near-death experience, they have this contact with the other side, and that this contact, like many people say, even Raymond Moody said, the first characteristic is it's that it's ineffable. It is undescribable. You cannot put it in words. So, what I have found is that while some people, especially children, say, I met a being of light, once they have received certain education, they start saying, I met an angel. And if this is someone who has had a more spiritual training or education, he will say, I met a spirit guide, or I met Jesus. Sometimes they meet this being that is all love, all wisdom, all peace, and that is basically God in human form. And they call him Jesus. And I believe that he is Jesus, but he is also the same loving being of light that that people saw when they had a near-death experience back in ancient Egypt. They also saw this loving being of light, which is God in human form, but they did not call him Jesus because Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. So they called him Ra, the son of the God of the sun, or the sun God, or they called him Osiris. And if someone had an NDE in ancient Greece, they saw this God made, turned into human, this being of light, and they called him Apollo, or they gave him some other name. So I believe that depending on your culture, you will give it a name. I've also noticed that, not in all cases, but in many cases, when they asked this being, are you Jesus? He almost never says, yes, I am Jesus. He says, I am he who you call the Lord. I have been given many names. You can call me what you want. Or he almost never says, I am Jesus, because he is Jesus, but Jesus, like I said, was born 2,000 years ago. So what about before that? Thousands of years before the birth of Jesus, he existed. They all did, what we call angels. Now, the interesting thing is that kids who are 2 years old, 3 years old, they see these beings, these light beings, and although they describe them identically the same as beings of light, they do not name them as angels unless they have been taught that word. And you asked if kids are uh, more connected to the other side. Well, apparently, yes. The most kids see angels or these beings of light, and most kids they describe God as all that is. Some see him as an old man with white beard, but not all of them. According to PMH Atwater, these kids who are age 5 or under, they come back with many gifts and with many understandings. And they also come back longing to return to that place. Some of them come back with high intelligence. For example, Ingrid Honkala, who was 2 years old when she had her experience, and she came back with uh, being able to do out of body travels. She met beings of light. She, at the age of 3, she could already read and write and solve complex puzzles. And some others come back with healing powers. And everything points out that these kids have nothing different in essence than adults. Perhaps the main difference is that they do not put into words their experience like adults do. And the other difference is that they take longer to understand what happened and to share their experiences with others. While adults may take from 7 to 10 years, these kids usually take from 20 to 30 years to start sharing their experience and understanding what really happened.
So, how does it feel, keeping this experience hidden and then opening up about it?
Well, I owe this to Dr. Yvonne Kaysen. I interviewed her. She has had 5 near-death experiences, and she coined the term spiritually transformative experience. She is the first Canadian doctor to study near-death experiences and spiritually transformative experiences, and she spent many years helping people with these experiences. So one day I interviewed her, and right after the interview, she asked me, have you ever had a spiritually transformative experience? I had never heard that term before. So I thought she was asking me, have you ever had a spiritual experience? And I said, yeah, but I don't like to talk about it. I said, and she said, okay, let's meet. I want to talk to you about my experience. Let's meet with someone else, with several persons who belong to the organization known as Spiritual Awakenings International, which she founded with Robert Baer. And I went to a meeting, and for the first time in many years, or for the first time in my life, I shared my experience with people who could really understand. So this meeting began with them telling their experiences. So it made me feel comfortable. I heard their experiences, And then when it was my turn, I told them my experience, and they were really loving and understanding. They gave me the support I needed. And after that, I started going to the sharing groups or sharing circles that are held privately first with Spiritual Awakenings International and then with IANS. They also have sharing groups in which 5 or 10 or 12 persons get together and they each talk about their experiences in private without recording, without taking pictures. And the more I went to these meetings, the more I realized that I had things in common with all of them. And finally, uh, Peggy Robinson interviewed me, and I talked about my experience in NDE radio for the first time, and it was hard for me. But after that, I started sharing my experience openly. And at first, right after I had my experience, I did not want to share it. I I had an experience I did not mention is that I felt that God, after I had this download, the small poem about creation and this understanding that it was the secret behind all religions, I said I'm going to write a book. Since I'm a journalist, I've always loved to write. I said, wow, I'm going to write a book about this and I'm going to be famous. That was my thinking. It was very selfish. So I started writing, and one night I felt the presence of God. I don't know how to call him. I felt this presence behind me. And I felt that he asked me, why? Why are you doing this? Why do you want to write this down? Or why do you seek the higher knowledge? And the answer came in from my heart without even formulating it, because I want to write a book and be famous. And I understand that that was the wrong answer. So since this was very fresh, I fell down on my knees and said, no, 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 God, forgive me that I'm not going to write a book. I'm not going to tell the world about it. I'm not. That cannot be the reason for this. And I stopped thinking that I would write a book. And I've written many books, but I've never told my story in book form. I will, probably soon. Uh, I've written over 20 spiritual books about different religions, trying to explain that all religions have the same common roots. And I have published my 2 books, The Stairway to Heaven, which is the near-death experiences, uh, heavenly near-death experiences, and more recently, The Girl Who Visited Heaven. And one of the things that I'm proud of is that this book the foreword is written by Raymond Moody. So I managed to interview Raymond Moody several times, and it's not that we are super friends, but he did write the foreword for my book. And this first book, the foreword is by Melvin Morse, who was the pioneer children's near-death experience researcher. He was in charge of the first case, and that's what I talk about in this second book, The Girl Who Visited Heaven. I mentioned how Melvin Morse, who was a skeptic, had the chance to resuscitate with CPR a small girl who was 7 years old. And when she came back, she told her story of meeting Jesus and what she called the Heavenly Father on the other side.
So beautiful. It's a really beautiful story. Cannot wait to read it. So, AJ, I want to thank you for sharing your story with us, and not just that, but also sharing your knowledge and all of the research that you've done throughout the years and distilling it down to, manageable pieces that we can take away from this conversation. So, for everybody that wants to know more about your books, about yourself, you also have a really great YouTube channel. Where can people find you?
Well, they can find me in Facebook under AJ Parr, AJ Parr. The best way to find me on YouTube is to write down in the search engine AJ Parr, and my YouTube channel will come out. I will also give you the links if you can include them in the description. Also in Amazon, where you can find all my books. If you write AJ Parr, you will see my author page, and you will find my books. So I would say that is the best way to find my work. And if someone wants to write to me directly, my email is ajparbooks@gmail.com. I also help people publish their books, write their books. I have a publishing company, and uh, if someone's interested they can contact me and we can talk about this. But I'm open to anyone who wants to contact me.